Hello, everybody. Welcome to our event on the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. We're excited to have this. And just for clarity, what we're doing is we had our big annual UPRT Safety Summit back in the middle of November. And what we decided to do is to re-release the topics and have expanded Q&A sessions. So I'm excited today to be joined with the team that put that on back in November. And here with me, I have Randall Brooks, our Executive Vice President of Flight Operations. I have Captain Clark McNeese, Executive Vice President of Standards and Compliance at APS. So welcome, guys. I know we're going to have an introduction in the recording we're going to play, but do you guys want to add anything to maybe what's exciting about this event for you today?
I just appreciate the opportunity to get to share the information that we gathered for the UPRT Safety Summit and provide it to people that might not have been able to make that event and to increase everybody's awareness on these important topics.
Great. Otter?
Yeah, no, I think it's great. The industry is talking a lot about this, and it's fun to be part of all the initiatives.
All right, great. So what we're going to do here, everybody, just so you understand, is one thing I want to do is I want to bring up a slide out of the presentation that we did that we want to spend a little bit more time in after the recording plays. And it's going to be focused on the paradigm shifts. We're going to talk about that in a second. But remember, the most important part of today is its expanded Q&A. And so please, as you're listening to the event, you're watching the video, the recording that we're going to play, is think about questions you have on the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard, because it's really talking about a paradigm shift, a different way to approach the solutions to loss of control in flight. So here's the slide. After the event plays, you're going to see this slide show up during the presentation. And we were thinking that, as an additional area to talk about after the video while we're waiting for questions to come in would be this one. What does the paradigm shift look like and why? So guys, before we go to the recording, anything to talk about in particular on this slide, maybe to give a preview of what we're going to chat about after?
Well, I think everybody is familiar with the fact that we have a lot of accidents on takeoff and landing. Certainly there's a large number of landing accidents, but when you look at the spectrum and the percentages that are listed here, it paints a bit of a different picture. And I think that the video that we're going to be watching is going to help people understand that. And we can answer questions at the end, which to me is always one of the most interesting parts of these presentations.
Otter, any final comments before we go to the recording?
Will said it'll be a fun discussion.
All right, great. Well, let me make sure I get the button pushing right here. Let me remove this slide. Let me make sure that we're all set here, and I'm going to add the video. So we will join in here again live, which we are right now after the recording plays, and we'll go straight to that slide as we wait for questions. All right. Okay, guys, here it goes, I hope, when I click this button.
Hi, and welcome to our second session of the 2022 UPRT Safety Summit for Professional Pilots Worldwide. I'm Randall Brooks, the Executive Vice President for Aviation Performance Solutions. And our next session is going to talk about a standard for upset prevention and recovery training, something that's been needed since its inception. And to do that, we could find nobody better than two of the gentlemen that are the most experienced in upset prevention and recovery training delivery in the world, Paul B.J. Ransbury and Clark Otter McNeese. Both of these gentlemen have their background in military aviation as fighter pilots. Both of them flew as airline pilots and have that experience. But most importantly, both of them have been involved in the training of thousands of pilots in upset prevention and recovery techniques. So if we are looking for somebody to tell us what works, we could find nobody better than BJ and Otter, who are going to talk to us about the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. Take it away, BJ and Otter.
Thank you, Randy, for that great introduction. We're just excited to get going on this topic, the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. With that, before we get started, Otter, why don't you say hi to everybody out there today?
Well, greetings, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thanks, BJ. Looking forward to this discussion on this topic.
Well, let's just jump right into it real quick. Who is APS? We're hoping to gain a little bit of credibility as we get started here. Well, our purpose is we help pilots bring everyone home safely, and our mission is very apt to the presentation today. It's to crush the threat of loss of control in flight globally by partnering with safety champions to accelerate the adoption of life-saving APS upset training. I think the three key elements in there are highlighted: crushing this threat, which is completely unnecessary in our judgment, but also doing that by partnering with safety champions around the world. You're going to meet some of our partners here in just a minute to implement life-saving APS upset training. Because we have 30 years experience implementing this, we know exactly what it takes, how to do it on all levels of aviation. And we want to freely share that with the industry today through this concept called the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. With that said, our brand promise is every pilot trained in control all the time. Here's our brand new facility that we got installed last year. It is 2 facilities. The one on the right is our main facility right now. It is truly designed to be the nexus of UPRT excellence, all in one location. We have academic classrooms. We have on-aircraft piston, on-aircraft jet, advanced simulation, and 7 classes of airplane and virtual reality and mixed reality, all in one location. So it really has been designed to give the most effective, most comprehensive solution to overcoming the threat of loss of control in flight in the world. And that's what we're really proud about. And those methods and processes are what we're going to talk about today. But I would like to invite everybody, if you want to pause the video, if you're watching the recording, or take a screenshot now, I invite you, if you're ever in Arizona, to come and see us. We'd love to get you up for an evaluation, even if that's just a short tour. Depending on the size of your organization, we can get you up in an airplane, show you what we do and how we do it. There is no charge for that. So please take us up on that offer. You can get there by going to that URL or that QR code and submitting a request and a form that'll get you to our team. So a few of our partners, we're really excited about these safety champions that we partner with around the world that help us to win on this threat of loss of control in flight. And they are progressive, they're doing it right, and we're excited to have them as part of our team. So let's talk about this threat of loss of control. You can see it represented by the big red column there on the left. And the reality of it is, no matter how you look at aviation, different areas of aviation, whether that's general aviation, corporate executive, on-demand operations, or air carriers, you will see loss of control in flight dominating the fatal statistics. And in fact, it's not uncommon for it to be approximately equal to everything else combined. So this is a result of how the industry trains. And so a paradigm shift is required, and it's not going to happen by simply doing what we've been doing before under a different name, which is largely what's going on even today after guidance coming out in 2014 by ICAO, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. So to accomplish the paradigm shift, not only do we need to have great guidance like ICAO has started, we also have to understand how to implement it with the most effectiveness. And that's what we're going to talk about today with the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. So this particular graphic represents the concept that we're going to be discussing today. You're going to see that there's 5 pieces of pies, starting with the instructor through integrated program, training intensity, best practices, purpose-built platforms, but it's wrapped on the outer rim by initial training and then framed on the inner rim by recurrent training, all leading to the center area, which is every pilot in control. Now, the great news is, in addition to our presentation today, you can go to that URL and you can download a booklet that explains it at a high level so you better understand what this is. Now, the question really is, why did we do this? We were part of the group that put together the guidance that came out with ICAO in 2014. It was 40 organizations, 80 experts around the world from 2009 through about 2013. And the guidance put out by ICAO that we're going to see on this next slide is really excellent. It's a great start. It does have some gaps, but at least it's on track for what it does. What we saw, though, the challenge is a strong tendency for the industry to just simply do its very best to implement that, largely in the way it was already addressing loss of control in flight, or as I said earlier, doing the same thing just under a different name. And instead of unusual attitude training and stall training, just calling it upset prevention and recovery training and saying the intent of that guidance was accomplished. Well, that's not at all what needs to happen to implement an effective mitigation of loss of control. So we created the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard that's freely available to the industry around the world to help guide operators that want to do it right and what it takes to implement a solution that doesn't just fill an X on an X board to say you accomplished something, but to truly overcome this number one threat to air safety that is unnecessarily killing people around the world. So with that, very quickly, what ICAO talks about, and you can come back and look at it, is an integrated solution. It starts with academic academic training, which is very specific academics, on aircraft training to address the human factors, Non-type specific simulator training, we see that in ATP, CTP in the United States. Type specific simulator training, like we're seeing in the United States with FAR 121-423 extended envelope training supported by ACs 12111 and 12109, and then augmenting it with improved instructor operating stations. And a lot of this requires an improvement in technology to accomplish this. The problem, the technology side is far easier than the real challenge, which is creating the expert instructor to lead us through that process. So today, we are going to start with a discussion that begins with the instructor and then every area of the implementation of a program to take what ICAO is doing and doing as intended, but also we're going to be talking about how to take it to the next level. Starting with the ICAO solution, which is now struggling, and at least getting that in place is going to help safety, but there's way more that can be done when it comes to loss of control in flight. And that's really where our superpower is of APS. We know how to do it, what it takes, and what's required from a training standpoint to accomplish it. And that's what we're going to represent by the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. So with that introduction, Otter, why don't we go over to you to start introducing the concepts one by one?
Yeah, this pie you see here is what we're going to address, each of these pieces of the pie there. I'll start off talking about the number one there in light blue, elite instructors. We've got to have specialized training and qualifications for the instructors themselves. We can't just take our current CFI regime out there and just tell them to start teaching it because they largely haven't been trained themselves. So we've got to have IPs, instructors that have had the all attitude experience necessary to deliver the training, but also have some commercial experience as well. They need to understand what is appropriate to transfer, what type of skills that are transferable. There has to be a mastery of the positive skill transfer across the training platforms and the fleet types. The instructor needs to be trained in how to deliver the appropriate skill set so that there's not negative training and negative transfer of skill.
And I think ICAO talks about that to some extent. So let's talk about that previous graphic a little bit. What does it say about the instructor? Well, it explains that the instructor needs 3 levels of mitigation: awareness, prevention, and recovery. No longer is it just about maneuver-based recovery. There's a layered implementation of mitigation required by the instructor that needs to be facilitated in a number of different training platforms to include academic, on-aircraft, and advanced simulation. But interestingly, the role of the instructor is, yes, escalating from awareness, prevention to recovery. But really the key to maximizing the effectiveness of upset prevention and recovery training is the instructor's mastery of de-escalating all the way from the recovery back in to the heart of the envelope. Very interesting, a very different approach to instructor training, but that's what's necessary to be effective at upset prevention and recovery training to actually overcome the threat of loss of control.
And it's something, and it's something that takes over 5 weeks of initial training for our new instructors as well, just to get them to a basic on-aircraft UPRT skill delivery set.
Sure does.
All right, the next piece of the pie is the integrated program. There has to be appropriate academics. Our typical run-of-the-mill academics that we have in flight training is not sufficient. We need on-aircraft platforms, especially all latitude, and then the advanced simulation devices, including virtual reality, maybe even MR and AR as well. All of this has got to be harmonized and overlaid there in a matter of days. You can't do it in just one day, and you shouldn't spread it out over weeks, months, or even years. It's got to be a certain intensity, and we'll talk about that here in a minute.
Yeah, and so to give an idea of that, so what does this paradigm shift of UPRT actually look like? Well, we need to really approach the threat differently. If we're just not talking about implementing the basic solution of ICAO, we need to look differently at how we operate. So if we take a spectrum of where fatal accidents are occurring as an example shown here, we can see that the UPRT program has to be focusing on those areas where the data demonstrates that it's occurring. So there's a couple of dimensions. We got to be focusing on where it's occurring, where we operate the airplane in our profile, what type of airplane that we operate, all the way down to type-specific considerations. But most importantly, and this is the one that usually is lagging in the industry, especially as we're seeing in EASA's implementation of on-aircraft UPRT, is addressing the human factors, training the human being to be resilient in crisis, and that takes time on how to do that. Unfortunately, the downward pressure on time for training, the downward pressure on the price of training programs is going to limit our ability to do this properly. But I can tell you right now, the reason why the human being in this graphic is the biggest part of it, because that's the most significant barrier we have of implementing effective UPRT. And we'll talk more about it in just a minute in intensity. Otter, over to you.
Yeah, training intensity, next piece of the pie there. Human factors have to be contained while embedding these all-latitude skills. There are certain psychophysiological issues that pilots have to learn how to overcome, and we can really only do that in proper platforms, especially the on-aircraft arena. The training intensity requires substantial on-aircraft training flights to foster this resiliency that they need in order to be able to access their skills in a crisis. If the been there, done that t-shirt means a lot. So just doing simulator-based training is not going to be sufficient to address the intensity.
Well, let's talk about now what it actually takes to train a pilot. Now, as an organization, a company, we wish we could do it in one flight. We wish we could do it in two flights. We actually wish we could do it in 3 flights, but the reality of it is it takes more than that. The human being, for whatever reason, to get the dendrites connecting in the brain properly, to truly get into a condition of over-learning and resilience, to be successful in a crisis event, takes time. And unfortunately, the ICAO requirement only requires 3 hours, which is often broke up into 3 flights. You can accomplish the what and how of UPRT in that amount of time, but it's not enough time for the cognitive training of the pilot. It's just been proven. And we train pilots all the way from general aviation, but mostly in military and corporate aviation, where they have thousands and thousands of hours of experience. It's not about a new pilot not being able to learn quickly. It's about being a human being and how your brain works. So let's take a look at this very quickly. And we have an entire webinar that talks about this diagram in great detail. We're going to hit it at a very high level right now. So when we start UPRT, there's essentially no change. And later, we'll talk about how we determine what that capability level is, but between about 20 and 40%, about a 30% success rate in testing pilots in a startling situation where they didn't know what particular maneuver was coming, but they knew they were being tested. We determined that the success without effective training or the training that the industry is providing is about a 30% success rate. With one UPRT flight, we see that there's an increase largely due to an awareness increase and habituation, getting used to what's going on. And most people would expect that trajectory of continuing learning would continue at an upward gradient, but it doesn't. Now, this regression occurs when you're in a program that's designed to train the cognitive processes of the brain. It necessarily requires an regression to sensitization. I can tell you right now, we can take a person up in 2 flights and make them feel like King Kong at the end of it, but we're not actually giving them the cognitive training they need to succeed. In a program that's done properly, and we've tried every which way from Sunday to do this, regression is required in the second flight for them to now get into a mode of learning. The brain is going through conditioning to now follow through in the next flight of further habituation and then extinction of fears to be able to be effective in a crisis event. They're truly starting to build the been there, seen that capability that they need to be successful. And then the 4th flight, the 3rd day, is where we see a huge acceleration in competency. Then the additive integrated training, virtual reality simulation adds depth and resilience and fills in the gaps of how they operate and where they operate their airplane to ultimately arrive at a scenario of having all factors in place: habituation, extinction, reappraisal, and over-learning. It's now a skill set embedded with them, and we continue to grow that skill set, hopefully through complementary recurrent training sessions. Anything to add on that, Otter?
No, it is fascinating, and it took us a lot of years to really figure this out, how best that pilots do learn.
We literally see this every day with hundreds and thousands of pilots year over year over year. It is just the way the human being learns. And to deny this is to deny them the capability and the competency they need to be successful in a crisis. And remember, the very best recovery is never being there in the first place. This process gives them both recovery capability, but vastly improve awareness and prevention capability as well. Okay, Otter, what's up next?
Next piece of the pie is you need a program that's going to employ the best practices. ICAO, IATA, FAA, and some of the specialized training organizations came together and they came up with some guidance that's very good and largely robust there. So you need to ensure that these guidelines are implemented in the training program.
And there's many of them. What I want to talk about here today is something that in 2014, when the ICAO manual on upset prevention and recovery training came out, IATA came out with a document the very next year identifying best practices. And in there, they talk about something that is very important, but often gets overlooked in implementing an effective UPRT program. And that's the implementation of a strategy or a call-out process when you're doing effective upset prevention and recovery training. And as we see, as we train general aviation pilots, airline pilots, corporate executive pilots, professional pilots, military pilots, you need to be cognitively trained with call-outs to be conditioned in an airplane upset event. How do you get yourself organized to do the right thing in the right order to get yourself mitigated or diagnosed back into the Hartley envelope? This is one example of a strategy that APS uses, the all-attitude upset recovery strategy, but fundamentally, a strategy has to consider the following areas, and it has to be transferable. It has to include type-specific considerations. It needs to manage angle of attack first and foremost in the process, manage lift vector, energy management, integrate secondary controls to ultimately manage the flight path divergence. Strategy, as you will find when you go through a comprehensive, robust program, is the foundation from which all competency and capability comes, and again, largely gets overlooked or gets inserted without the instructors truly knowing what it is, how it applies. But the biggest threat here is the instructors not understanding what the exceptions to the strategy are. So it's a real challenge to implement this. I know that when we started rolling this out with 15,000 pilot airlines, there's a lot of objections. But as long as you have a third-party resource that could come and address those objections to rationalize it in a way that the pilots understand, it makes perfect sense, and it transfers to all types of fixed-wing airplanes, including fourth-generation fly-by-wire Airbus airplanes, advanced Boeing conventional airplanes, and even fly-by-wire Boeing aircraft. Otter,
I'll just re-emphasize that it's one thing to have a recovery strategy, but it's another to be taught it or to know how to teach it in a transferable way.
Yeah, and that has to occur while the cognitive conditioning is taking place as well for it to be truly embedded. And it has to be done properly and thoroughly. Repetition of proficiency is key, but that repetition of proficiency has to be guided and counseled and really led by an instructor that's an expert in its application across all domains of implementation, from on-aircraft to simulation to actual in-flight operations of commercial and corporate airplanes. Okay, Otter.
All right, this next one is purpose-built platforms implemented to install 8 critical QLMC mitigation criteria. We're going to talk about that here next. This critical mitigation criteria, there's a laundry list of them. We've got to optimize the use of each of the integrated platforms to fill the skill sets and knowledge set gaps.
Okay. Again, we have an entire webinar on this, and a lot of this is counterintuitive. And what you want to do as a program implementation expert or somebody who's charged with implementing UPRT, and your goal is to not just do the regulatory minimum, but overcome the threat of loss of control. Here are the top 8 criteria that matter the most. There's more than this, but these are the 8 critical items. And you'll see on the right what the best platforms are. And this is assuming that the program is being implemented in accordance with EPIC S2, the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. You can see the relative weight of those factors, and they're ordered from most important to less important, not least important. But when you're auditing your program, and often the top 3 get missed, you have to be comprehensively addressing human factors. The program has to be accomplished in an all-attitude environment, and it must integrate strategy, as we just previously talked about. Get those knocked out, then we need to look for G awareness. There has to be sufficient repetition and proficiency. You'll also need to address very low altitude, all-weather upsets. You can see the simulator's the best platform for that. And then to CRM, SRM, and then least but not unimportant is to be sure that representative control field and responses are addressed in the program It is not the top one by any stretch. It has to be integrated, but human factors, all attitude, environment, immersion, and strategy are vastly more important done properly than representative control, field, and response. That said, the solution must integrate and consider all of these.
And it's interesting how most people think that having an aircraft that represents your control and response of your aircraft is most important, but that's not the case.
And the simulator is really the best for the latter one, but the simulator on its own is not a full mitigation. In fact, in our judgment, it's around a 46% mitigation of the threat. And we have those developed from our analysis related to the quantitative loss control and flight mitigation criteria. Okay, last part of the pie here, Otter.
Last one is initial and recurrent training. Definitely have to have this initial training that's compliant, intense, and comprehensive there in order to get your full loss control and flight mitigation. There are perishable skills, however. We would all probably appreciate there's a lot of counterintuitive skill sets that have to be developed, and they are perishable, hence the need for recurrent training.
Great. And just to give an idea of that, here's what we're seeing. And this is for really decades of work. Back in 2007, 2008, that bracket you see between 20 and 40%, we investigated 135 pilots coming through our program in a couple months. And we brought them in. We explained to them they were going to be tested. We explained to them what they would do that was wrong, what they should do that's correct. Gave them an opportunity to go up in the airplane, to handle the aircraft, get familiar with it. Then we introduced 5 startling events to them. And we found that their capabilities were between 20 and 40% of recovering the airplane within the performance capabilities of their aircraft. There was no special technique required. We were just looking for a safe and effective recovery. Now, what we determined is that in that process is that we had to, first off, determine that the training occurred at the training organization. And through a matter of a couple days of doing the training properly, like we see in Epic S2, we see a vast increase in capability by the end of the 3rd day or 2.5 days in of a 96% capability on average, but it never fully mitigated the gap, which we'll talk about in a second. Most importantly, though, is the ongoing recurrent. And you see these atrophies of skills that we can observe over time that occur. We continue to recommend that UPRT should be accomplished every year. Most flight departments and organizations self-select every 2 to 3 years. But most importantly, you can see that the peak goes up at recurrent and the atrophy of skills slows as you continue to build a lifelong program. Sadly, but the reality is we're never going to fully mitigate the effect of upset or of loss of control in flight because human beings are human beings. Airplanes do fit are unrecoverable, unfortunately. Otter, anything to add to that before we go to our last slide?
No, that was great.
All right, folks, so that's the overview of what the paradigm shift looks like. There's your booklet to download, the Epic S2 guide. If you're in our area, please take advantage of the APS evaluation. Come and see us. And as I mentioned earlier, depending on the size of your organization, we can get you up flying in airplanes and jets and certainly into the simulator. So with that, Otter, I'd like us to head on over to questions. So back to you, Randy. Well, it's said back to you, Randy. So I think that maybe you want to share your thoughts on that because I accidentally removed our PowerPoint. So maybe while you're just giving your thoughts, I'm going to bring that back in for our discussion here. And we're still looking for questions, everybody. Please go ahead and put your questions in, but we kind of planned on it taking a little bit. So there's some things we want to talk about. Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, I think I love sharing that information. I think the depth of it, as you said at one point in the recording, we have entire separate recordings and presentations on different aspects that were presented in there. And I hope that people that are watching understand by viewing that the level of sophistication that has come about. For so many people in industry, the term upset prevention recovery training is sort of monolithic, like it's all the same. And that's because it is outside of the mainstream right now. And so they haven't evaluated it, analyzed it the way we have had the opportunity to over decades. And we hope that in watching the recording that just played, that you see the different layers, one after another, that can be looked at. And when you're accurately considering all of them, then it gets down to the whole purpose of the presentation is trying to keep people alive by mitigating their risk. It's just that we have realized that different platforms mitigate different levels of risk, and that there are different ways of presenting information and flowing a program together to make it effective. And we're very proud of the fact that we've developed what we think is the most effective program in the world right now for mitigating the loss of control and flight threat.
Otter, thoughts before we get to the slide?
Nothing to add technically. I just think it's neat to see our international audience from Italy and Germany and all that. And,
yeah, it's great. And we have Captain Skip Johnson there, just showed up, and he was out shoveling snow, he said, in the cold. And Skip is a former Thunderbird. He's also the program development expert that's working with United Airlines on United Aviate Academy. So very excellent person to have in the meeting today. And Skip, we do have your question there, so we will get to that. We want to talk about this slide a little bit, but folks, I'm watching 4 questions coming in, and we do, Skip, we have yours in line there as well. Let's go ahead and look at this slide here, guys. Let me make sure I get this right. Okay, here we go. So here's the slide we were talking about. So the importance of this is that a UPRT program has to be designed around how the pilot operates. So for example, a solution for a single engine, single pilot, piston operator flying a Cessna 172 is not the same program as it is for somebody flying a Citation 10 multi-crew at high altitude in the weather. It's just not the same. So what typically happens is that very often when we meet with people, we'll run into this Citation 10 pilot and saying, well, we already do UPRT. We go and we do a program in an extra 300 with XYZ company, doesn't matter who it is. And so if that particular pilot was a single engine piston, single pilot operator flying VFR only, you know what? I'd say, hey, high five. Come on, that's great, man. Wonderful, good for you. But when I look at now that program that is great for the single engine, single pilot Cessna pilot, and now I'm standing in front of a Citation 10 pilot that operates into very bad weather, operates into high altitude operation, operates at a crew in a complex airplane, that solution that the Cessna pilot is getting is not at all what they need. And in fact, if they now consider being trained in a piston-only solution, for example, there are huge gaps in their risk that they are accepting unnecessarily. They need a program that considers what they operate, where they operate, and how they operate, okay? So where do they operate? Well, this particular operator operates at high altitude. What do they operate? A multi-engine high-performance business jet. How do they operate? They operate as a crew. Or, for example, you also have these operators that are military, where they have a mission, where they go into much more aggressive situations, where they're more expected, likely to be required to maneuver the airplane. So in other words, the program needs to be designed around the operator. And that takes robust solutions to truly mitigate the threat of loss of control in flight. And so just for those folks out there that are doing upset prevention and recovery training, and you're doing simulator only, you're leaving a lot of risk on the table. If you're doing piston only training and you're a multi-engine high performance crew jet operator, you're leaving a lot of risk on the table. And in both situations, and there's many more, it's completely unnecessary. There are programs that can wrap themselves around what, where, and how you operate that can fully mitigate your threat, the best possible in the industry that is vastly superior to just a one solution approach to it. Guys, anything to add on that before we jump into this slide?
You know, BJ, an analogy just occurred to me. Most of the people that are watching, if they're type-rated pilots, are familiar with type rating courses that are going to cover, you know, the engines, the fuel system, electrical system, avionics, environmental control system. You wouldn't consider going to a type rating provider that only covered the engines, only covered the electrical system. And yet people are doing exactly that when they go to a UPRT provider that is only covering one aspect of their risk. So this level of granularity, this degree of precision in risk reduction is what's really going to make people safe and, as we've said, shift the paradigm.
Exactly. And, so what I would say here, let me just, I'm going to jump a little bit here. Let me just say, let me just go right to this slide for everybody who's on the call today. I highly recommend that if you want to mitigate your risk of loss control in flight, it's not about more time, and it's not necessarily even about more cost. The point is developing a program that's going to fit with you. So I would recommend that graphic you see on the left, which is the Epic S2 guide, the very topic we're talking about it. Get your phone out, download that guide, and read more about what a comprehensive solution looks like for you of the 6 factors that we talked about. On the right side is if you actually want to see this solution in operation, you can go there and fill out an evaluation. You get here to Arizona, we're going to show you around and show you solutions. You arrive here, there's going to be no cost for you. We're here to save lives. That's our mission. That's what we're trying to accomplish. You get in here and take a look at what a full solution looks like for your flight department, your operation, your flight school, your airline, and you will see that the future of upset prevention and recovery training effectiveness is truly founded on the Epic S2 approach that we're talking about here today. Let's go back to that slide. You guys, anything to add on that before I move off this one?
Not for me.
All right, so let's take a look at it. So right here on this particular graphic, and again, let me just make sure I'm not missing a question. Okay, another question just came in, which is great. All right, and we're going to go to questions right after this, is that this shows a distribution of fatal accidents. So that's airline. That's the last 10 years in the worldwide jet fleet. But if you look into general aviation, for example, here's a distribution of the risk of loss of control in flight, isolating business aviation. All this information is available from the NTSB, by the way. Here's the distribution of loss of control for instructional aviation in the middle. There's the distribution of loss of control in personal aviation. Have a look at that. It's the same shape. Fatal accidents in these areas broken out are all around nearly 50% of the fatal accidents. Now, what really matters is where is loss of control happening? Well, the good news is all that's available as well. You go in here to take a look at business aviation, instructional aviation, and personal aviation. If you are operating in those areas, you need to look into how, what, and where you operate, and what is the threat distribution for you. So, for example, if you take a look at business aviation, you can see the top 2 threat areas on the far left are approach and maneuvering. If you go to the far right in personal aviation, you can see the top 2 threat areas aren't the same. They're maneuvering and approach, and further down initial climb and en route, there's a different priority and what that spectrum looks like. The point is your program should be wrapped around where your threat areas are and how you operate your airplane. Guys, anything to add to this before we go to questions? We got a few coming. No? All right, let's remove that. All right, good stuff. Okay, here, let's go to the question. Let's talk about Skip's question first, since we talked about him. Let me go to that. I'm going to bring it in right there, guys. So let me just read it while you're thinking about it. I'm going to be the reader. You guys can be the answerers, and if I have any color to add at the end, I'll do that. Okay, can you please ask Otter or BJ, and I would say Randy as well here, to address their view of when UPRT should be introduced into pilots' aviation education due to the learning law of primacy? And of course, paired with that is intensity and exercise as well. But from the standpoint of law of primacy, what's learned first lasts longest? Otter and Randy, do you want to talk to that for a little bit?
Yeah, there's sort of a tension in that question between trying to introduce the skills to pilots as early as possible to try and provide the mitigation of the threat. But the problem is that you have to walk before you can run. And so what we mean by that is that in order to employ the strategy, in order to really understand some of the foundational aerodynamics, the pilot's got to have at least reached the level of mastery of soloing the airplane, more likely somewhere along the lines of achieving a private license, because then we've got to get them comfortable and competent in the normal domain before we expand their skills to encompass the upset domain. So what does that look like in hours? Probably, around 100 hours or so, we start to have good traction with people. Certainly, it's helpful if they've gotten, some instrument training to be able to utilize that. We've had ab initio cadets fly with us before in the 120 to 180 hour range, but that's my view. Otter?
Yeah, we tried to whittle down the hours because we saw very early that you can train them too early and either overwhelm them and then even instill fear that they don't get over. So In general, minimum 40 hours there. But, big picture is early. Law of primacy is huge because, I fly with professional pilots who've been flying airplanes for 20 years and they're afraid of a power off stall. So we've got to ensure that they don't get that kind of fear in a career.
So if we talk about it in terms of not hours, I think that for the person to get a lot of quality and value and long-lasting resilience from the UPRT training, they need to have the equivalent of a private instrument level of experience and academic knowledge. That would really be the minimum. Before that, they won't have the experience and breadth of knowledge to truly be able to extract all the value out of the program. So it's really a judgment call in our judgment on the actual pilot. Probably more importantly, the flight school, for example, if we're talking about flight school training, is for them to decide when the best positioning of the program is. And we're always happy to consult to talk about that. But one of the lines we always draw is that effective UPRT includes instrument recovery training, which is a major gap that ICAO missed when they did their solution to loss of control in flight. They don't require, for example, on-aircraft instrument recovery training, which is a gap that we talked about actually just the other day. Okay.
One more thing to add, BJ, on that question. Skip is obviously pointing towards trying to provide this training early. And what is so important about that, and why, and ICAO recognized that this should be incorporated in licensing training, the loss of control, avoidance, and recovery training. Aviation Rulemaking Committee, advocated for it prior to commercial licensing. And the importance of that is that then these kids, these young pilots, have skills that will carry with them through their entire career. And if the UPRT is delivered correctly, it should be transferable to every fixed wing aircraft they'll go on to fly throughout their careers.
Great. Okay, I want to add this point. It's not a question, but a point brought up by Bob Mitchell. When we bring that in right here, is totally agree with the regression aspects on Flight 2. So you guys want to comment on that at all? Otter, maybe you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was something when I started delivering UPRT many years ago. It was something that you saw, but you didn't really understand. And especially as an instructor, you really struggle. Well, what am I doing wrong on Flight 1 that they're actually not doing well on Flight 2 there? And until I started and we started really looking at how people learn, then it made much more sense. But I think the biggest thing about this regression is we can't let pilots stop there. I mean, if they go out and get UPRT, they only say do a 2-flight program. They really are at risk, in fact, increased risk compared to before the training.
There's kind of a parallel way of looking at this, which is that one of the big risks in upset prevention recovery training is the feeling that you're doing it right without questioning. And that's why a lot of people, they'll go through one flight and go, wow, that's great. That's all I need. I understand everything. And then they go to their second flight and they go, nope, that's all I needed was 2 flights. Yeah, I was wrong about the 1 flight. And so, because of the fact that they have no experience in that domain, they really are blind to the threat. And so it's not just the number of flights, but there's a lot of other aspects of upset prevention recovery training that are just so outside of our normal flying in the normal domain that just people don't realize it unless they're getting their training from people that have the expertise to make sure that it delivers comprehensive training that's mitigating all of the threats.
Yeah, and I would add that you got to remember that we're the second flight for us. We've been doing this for nearly 30 years. It probably took us 10 years about how to make the most efficient, most effective program to accomplish the outcome in minimum time without leaving gaps on the table. And that's where it occurs in a program led by APS, okay? You can have a 5-flight program and never actually achieve resilience or a transferable skill. So it's really all about the program. Now, Otter, I set you up to talk about Bob because he's one of the instructors at CAE military, right? And so I just want to share that the regression that Bob's seeing, you got to remember that he's working with military pilots. He's actually part of a team in Dothan, Alabama, where APS has their military solutions in there for the King Air operations. And so it's not about even the type of pilot or their background, their experience. It's the human being. We see that in airline pilots, commercial pilots, private pilots. It is just when you're doing cognitive conditioning to ultimately land on overlearning, it's a cookie cutter process in how they get there. So it's really exciting in that respect. So Otter, do you want anything to add there now that I brought up that it's Bob?
Yeah, no, it's great to have Bob on the line. He was truly a great instructor under training there when he went through our program to learn to deliver it there. And it's great to have him on the team.
Okay, great. All right, let me put this away here. All right, so here's the next one. Let's just add this one in. And I'm sorry, his name didn't come through. I thought it Hamza, I thought it was, but let's see here. Okay. What do you think about after pandemic where not much flying is being done by pilots, even with high experience? I feel that there is a need to retrain as initial in this UPRT, seeking for human factors or skills gaps. So I think, the long layoff, how does it affect less experienced pilot and more experienced pilots? Why don't you guys talk to that for a few minutes, and we'll see if any more questions come in. And then maybe there's a couple slides I'll pull up to fill in the remaining amount of time with some quality stuff. Okay, maybe why don't we start with you, Otter, this time?
Sorry, I'm comprehending the question here.
Otter or Randy, do you want to jump in with your thoughts on that then?
Sure. It has made it a little bit more obvious. Obviously, the question is referring to what a lot of people call stick and rudder skills. We look at it as manual flight operations proficiency because it does involve cognitive aspects. And it is certainly highlighted due to the pandemic and the lack of hours that pilots have. But unfortunately, automation use in general is driving down manual flight operations proficiency. It's something that's been highlighted by the FAA repeatedly in infos and SAFOs that they've published. And most recently, they came out with an advisory circular on flight path management that really gets to the heart of the question here. Now, when you look at the recovery templates that are recommended by ICAO and in both FAA and EASA guidance, one of the first steps after confirming an upset is to disconnect the automation because there's a likely chance that that's a contributor. But with manual control of the aircraft, now you can apply a strategy, and know that you're getting exactly what you want out of the aircraft. So really, there is a need for that in all pilots. It's just highlighted. And the beauty of upset prevention recovery training is because if it's following guidance and doing it manually, there is going to be the contribution that the questioner is getting to in terms of their stick and rudder skills or manual flight operations proficiency. Because in our case, we're flying 4 flights, hand flown the whole time. And for a lot of our pilots, they're getting more hands-on time flying with us than they do in 6 months of their normal flying put together, just a little bit after takeoff and a little bit prior to landing. So it's even more important due to the lack of flight hours due to the pandemic.
Hey, Otter, before you get in there and you answer, I don't know if Carrie can find it on short notice. Didn't expect this question up, but it's a great one. I did an entire training session on this at Bombardier Safety Stand Down, talking about the pandemic and the increased risk of loss of control in flight as a result of it. And I don't know if Carrie's able to jump through a hoop to try to find that, but maybe Otter, while you're answering, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can find that presentation and bring up a couple items on there that might be of value to respond to this more effectively. Otter, what are your thoughts on that?
I'll probably just add that I think there's an increased efficiency of developing and redeveloping manual flight operations skills through the use of UPRT. Because the skills required to be successful in upset prevention and recovery are transferable, and they transcend all phases of the flight there. So I think it would be a good thing to do, and it could be a very efficient way of regaining manual flying skills.
You touch on, Otter, with that answer. One of the aspects that we have discovered, we're focused on mitigating the loss of control in flight risk. But when we talk to pilots that have been through training with us again and again, when we ask them about the benefits other than in an actual upset event itself, which is obviously rare, they say confidence and information. And so that confidence is the fact that they have additional skills, but the awareness that comes through the training is something that can benefit them on every flight. It was interesting after we began doing training with Delta Airlines, one of the subject matter experts, instructors that we had trained was training their, at the time, managing director of training. And the managing director of training was very, very pleased to see that just in the course of his transition to the new aircraft, there were aspects that were learned through upset prevention and recovery training that were being applied to that type training. So there are a lot of different ways that UPRT can help other than just in an upset event.
Cool. Great, guys. Looks like Carrie found it. And I found the presentation, but an earlier version, and it didn't have the stats that I think this question was driving at. So Carrie put the link in there. You can't just click on it. You have to copy that link and then paste it into your browser. You just go through there. Bombardier Safety Stand Down, probably one of the most progressive safety organizations and events in the world. We spoke at that during the pandemic, and we covered that topic. But great question. Fantastic. Thank you for bringing that up. Anything else to add on that one, guys? All right. Okay, so here we are at the end of the time slot. What would you guys like to address? I'm just going to bring this slide into the screen for a second. Okay, any thoughts to share? It doesn't have to be on this slide, but and anything else related to every pilot and control solution standard. Here is the components of it, the high-level bullets on it. Take a screenshot of that. If you want to overcome the threat of loss of control in flight, you need to have a program that is firing on all pistons in all areas to make sure that you're getting a solution. It's not just about somebody saying, I have the best airplane. It's not that. That alone is not enough. It's not even enough that I have the best instructors or whatever it might be. The point is it has to be all at peak efficiency to truly overcome the fatal threat of loss of control in flight, because that's where everybody is dying and it's completely unnecessary. So Otter, Randy, anything else to add before we can wrap up in just 4 or 5 minutes if you like?
Yeah, I think go ahead, Otter.
No, I was just going to say, yes, you can see in the graphic that these pieces are connected. And I think that's what BJ was saying, is they're integrated. You take out one piece of this and it actually all falls apart, and you don't have the robustness, comprehensiveness, effectiveness at all. They all have to be there.
What I'd like to say as we get towards the conclusion is that APS's mission right now involves partnering, and that is because we know that we alone as a small organization can't reach everybody. We also know by some of the names that we recognize that are with us today that a lot of times we are singing to the choir. And we know that there are a lot of like-minded safety champions, and we appreciate your help in trying to increase the awareness of the loss of control in flight threat. We think it's largely underestimated by industry, by regulators, by pilots. And so if you've got something out of this, please share it with other pilots that you think would benefit from the information you've heard today.
Otter?
That's it. It's great to be with everybody.
Okay, great. So folks, again, have some resources here for you. The Epic S2 guide is a fantastic place to start and read about that. But the point is, in comparison to all the other lethal threats on the table, if there's a fatal accident that happens tomorrow, there's a 50% chance that it's going to be loss of control in flight. So if you feel that loss of control in flight is a low probability event, it is. However, it is your number one threat to your life and the lives of your passengers that needs to be mitigated. And there's no reason why you can't make decisions on training to fully mitigate it based on what, where, and how you operate in your operation, your type of airplane, and on the flight deck. The other one, of course, is the evaluation. Please, we're here to save lives. That's what our job is. Remember, our purpose is we help pilots bring everyone home safely. And to Randy's point, we're here to crush the loss of control and flight threat worldwide. And that's through partnering with safety champions just like United Aviate Academy with Skip Johnson here, doing a fantastic job in approaching it in an all new paradigm shift of overcoming this threat for future pilots. and truly transforming low experience into high aviation safety. They're leaders. United Airlines takes this very seriously. So does United Aviation Academy. So we're excited about that. One of our most recent partnerships. But again, all across the board, from training centers to insurance organizations to the military to owner-operator groups, even simulator manufacturers partner with APS because they recognize how this is a major threat to safety, and they want to make sure they're doing everything they can to be able to help improve the safety of their clientele. And a way to do that is help them mitigate their number one risk. So with that, final words of wisdom from each of you, and then we're going to say goodbye for today. Why don't we start with you, Randy, then Otter, then I'll wrap it up with a big thank you to everybody for joining us today.
I'm gonna use the same parting that we just got from Christos Elias, which is Merry Christmas to everybody. I hope you enjoy time during this holiday season with your families.
Yeah. And I'll give the shout out to Christoph there in Germany, another big UPRT advocate out there on the other side of the world. It's great to see him on it. So
cool. Great. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And remember, you can go take a look at our LinkedIn Live events and all of these things we're talking about. We're at the point now where we've covered a lot of these topics that we talk about as one point of discussion in dedicated webinars to overcome those. So if you're not sure how to find those, try searching for them on LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel that collects all these into different playlists. And so please let us know if there's any way that we can help you. And if you're ever in Arizona at our headquarters, drop by and see our nexus of UPRT excellence, which is the facilities we built specifically for this reason, to put this number one threat to air safety behind the industry, because there is a way, it's proven, and it's there and available today. So with that, thank you, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to our next event, which, Randy, I believe it's in January with Wyvern. Is that right?
That is correct. It's going to be January 25th, I believe. Excellent.
Okay, guys. So with that, take care, everybody. Appreciate you all being here. We'll see you next time. And Merry Christmas.